Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Shake Sales. I'm your host, Maggie Blume, the sales evangelist at Mailshake. And today we are speaking with Rex Biberston. He is the principal at No Fluff Selling, and he's also the author of Outbound Sales, No Fluff. And that's exactly what we'll be talking about today is no fluff with sales operations. Definitely Rex's, expertise here. And the funny thing is I was talking with Rex before this. The last time we talked, which was also the first time we talked, was about 3 years ago on a webinar right before COVID. So it's great that we're kind of past that sort of, but we're a little bit more normal now, still working remote, which was the topic we were talking about before. But Rex, I really, really appreciate you being here. Do you mind taking some time to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a longtime sales guy. I love sales. I love talking about sales, and I love working with sales teams. So I have gone from being head of sales and marketing at different startups in the past into full-time consulting and sales operations agency that we run. And we just love what we do. We show up every day excited to work with salespeople who want to do better and who want to close more deals, and sales leaders who want to see the numbers go up. And it's a blast.
Awesome. Yeah, career sales and, love talking about it too. And I've had a chance to listen to Rex on a number of podcasts, and I just recently read his book, so Outbound Sales, No Fluff, which we'll get into right here. And just to start it off, in that book, you talk a little bit and just kind of set up our conversation about sales processes and sales operations, about the idea of bucketing leads. So can you tell us a little bit more about, the importance of those 4 buckets that you mentioned and how sometimes sales leaders miss the mark when it comes to helping their reps with this?
Yeah, it's really easy to get distracted by burning fires in sales, or to get, kind of down on yourself. Oh, I'm just constantly doing the same thing over and over. It's the grind of sales. But in reality, if we can follow a bucketing process, which frankly I learned from my co-author, Ryan Reisert. He taught me, and we've deployed it previously at a company we ran called the Sales Developers, and we saw huge success with it. And the reps who have followed it have seen huge success with it. But it's simply putting in place a strategy, or an order of operations, you could say, that starts with prioritizing the things that are closest to closing, if you will, the things that are closest to revenue. Now, if you're an SDR, that might be the thing that's closest to booking a meeting. If you're an account executive, that's the deal that's got highest confidence. And it doesn't mean that you have to do those things first. It's not like, hey, 6 a.m. or 8 a.m., whatever time I start my day, that's the first thing I'm doing is I'm trying to work that deal hard. It's, okay, is there anything I need to do on that deal? And then work my way backwards to, okay, what's the next closest to closing? Okay, what's the next closest to booking a meeting? And we work these buckets in reverse order, right? Number 1 is a whole list of uncontacted. We've never even tried to reach these people. We call them strangers. These are the uncontacted list, all the way through to deals where perhaps even if we're like an account manager, deals where we have a lot of upsell opportunity. So we might prioritize that work over cold calling a bunch of strangers, right? If you're a full cycle rep, for example. So it's all about putting in order the highest value work, and then managing your time so that you make sure you're spending the most time or putting the most focus on those things at the latest stage, or the furthest along in the sales cycle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that that's like, structuring your day that way, does it matter? Like, is that something like sales reps should get into work or log on, and the first thing that they should focus on, is that really that first important tier, or does it depend on how they set up their own day?
Yeah, it depends on how they set up their day. It depends on whether they have scheduled next events, for example. So if they already have meetings booked with those deals that are kind of later stage in their pipeline, there's probably not a lot they need to do other than prep, which they should already have their calendar so they know when they've got prep time. But if they're also cold calling, for example, they're probably going to block that first hour or 2 of the day to do cold calling block, because they know that's when they're going to reach the most people in certain time zones. So rather than putting a bunch of pressure to jam all those high value things at the very beginning of the day, it's simply thinking about how do you need to manage your time so that you can be most efficient, but also make sure that you hit kind of the big rocks in the jar analogy, like make sure that you hit those big rocks first, and or rather that you have definitely accomplished something with them in that day, rather than focusing on, okay, I also got to make 100 calls today, so I'd better just get that out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes into the next thing that I just wanted to talk about with you, because something I found funny on your LinkedIn, like in your about page, is, stop selling like the Wild West, which definitely made me laugh. And I've been on teams or organizations that have been like that, where they just give you a sales activity number. I had never gotten any training of like how I should bucket this, what what I should do to be strategic with that number, like where I should start. It was really just like, hey, make 70 cold calls and, kind of figure it out from there. In my first job, which I evolved from that. But yeah, I feel like a lot of these teams don't bucket, or there's teams that you can run into that don't think strategic about setting up their day and is kind of like the Wild West. So how does this, what did you mean by that? And how does that relate back to sales ops?
Yeah, I mean, the Wild West is not having a strategy, not having a plan, not having, something that you can point to and say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing at this given moment in time. It's, I don't feel like doing this today, so I'm not going to do it. It's, I'm really excited about this deal, so I better spend a bunch of time on this deal when I've got a lot of other things to do today. That's what I mean by the Wild West, kind of shooting from the hip, like, hey, just do what you feel like today. And guess what? There's a lot of feelings, a lot of highs and lows in sales. So you might not feel like doing the things that are most important. I would say if I learned from a book, I learned from 4 Hour Workweek way back when I read that years and years ago, the thing that you're most avoiding doing is typically the thing you need to do the most. Apply that to sales. Think about if you just do whatever you feel like in that moment is something you're interested in, or, hey, this makes sense to do now. You're probably not doing the thing you most need to do. You're probably avoiding that. And so if you have an order of operations and you can say, this is why I'm doing this now, then you don't have to worry about getting to the other things because you will in their own due time.
Yeah. And I love what you said about, there's a lot of emotions in sales to begin with too. And I think having a structure like that as like an individual sales rep coming in there, having those buckets that you had set in place, I think just keeps them on a square map. Or like a straightforward map, I should say, when it does get emotional and you do have days where like this huge deal that you've been working on and putting this effort into loses. And then what I feel like doing after that is like not doing anything because I feel upset about it. But knowing that, you have this strategic plan in place and it's okay that fell through. I still have this other pipeline I've been working on. I think helps just with your mindset at the end of the day too in sales.
Well, and it also permits you to have a bad day. So like, let's say you had that deal that you lost. Oh, this is such a big deal. I was so excited about it. I'm having a rough day. Well, I can look at my order of priorities and say, you know what, of all my buckets, if I did anything today, it's not 100 cold calls, right? It's probably that I need to go follow up on that one deal where I never sent that proposal. I owed it to him yesterday. I said to get him to it today. I'd better go do that. And if that was the one thing I accomplished today, I at least furthered my goals. I was focusing on the most important thing with the little available time I was able to spend because I was just feeling awful, right? Now, some teams don't permit you to feel awful for too long. You got to get right back on the horse. It may be that you don't have that luxury of being able to say, I don't feel like working right now. But at least you can say, okay, I'm going to shift some of the things that I'm focused on today and maybe put some of those onto tomorrow, but I know why I'm doing these things in the order I'm doing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's giving you that room for the bad day. I love the way that you put that because it's true. If you've been doing all these strategic things and not just focusing all your energy on this one deal or focusing all your time on it, then that permits you to have a bad day, permits you to shift your focus once that falls through to elsewhere. But cool. So we talked about, the importance of bucketing, this idea from the concept from your book. Then talking about how we shouldn't sell like we're in the Wild West. So when you do come in, and I know you've done training with teams around sales operations, when teams don't have a sales, ops team, what do you think is like the biggest problems they typically run into when you start talking with them?
Yeah, there's two really common ones. And the first one, you've probably seen this a million times, and you work in a space that you'll probably see this from some of your customers. It's buying tools to solve process problems. Right? We buy a lot of technology to solve problems that really probably could have been solved by just diagramming what we're supposed to be doing and agreeing, okay, the problem's over here, not over there. Oh, we get distracted by the new shiny object and we say, oh, that sounds like it could solve our problem with this issue. So let's go buy that tool. And then you end up having a lot of sales tech and spending a lot of money. And then eventually you cut that sales tech and you wonder why your team wasn't more effective with it. So it's the number one problem I see is purchasing tools instead of focusing on the process problem. And then the second is you limit yourself as a manager. And this is a really common problem as well. You limit yourself to just coaching on sales calls. You think that helping your reps improve because you don't have a holistic picture of what's happening in your sales process, on your sales team. You can't see the whole picture. then you think, okay, how can I help my reps? Oh, I want to make them better on sales calls. So I go listen to Gong or on Chorus. I go listen to their calls, or I shadow them or they shadow me. And we focus way too much on this one aspect, which is a live conversation with a prospective customer. And there's so many other elements to sales that we're not spending time on because we don't think about it the whole process. We just narrow in on what's easy, what's accessible, what do I know I can help them improve on today.
Gotcha. So what you said is too much sales tech, and then also just not having a holistic picture and not being able to coach on the holistic picture of sales too. And it's funny that you say that about sales tech, and you said it just like the way that we all buy a sales tech. It's going to solve this problem that we think that we have. And that's the idea behind us as people in software selling sales software, is to do that. And I feel like it's kind of almost meta, because it's like, okay, now salespeople have too much software that they don't know what to do with it first, where they should really figure out that process. And it's funny, I just also had a conversation with Kevin Dorsey about this, of there's all these if then in sales. Like if I make X amount of cold calls, I can reach this many people. And, he said the big picture of it is connecting those if thens and then figuring out how you can put sales technology into it, or where sales technology can help with that process. But I think you're right. A lot of people skip that step and they just think like, okay, well, my friend who worked at this company uses Salesforce or HubSpot, and this is going to help us solve these things too, but not understanding the why it's going to help us, or where it should fit and how to strategically use it too.
Yeah, the truth is that there are a lot of tools that do the same things just slightly differently. They all have their own kind of unique take. But in reality, you can get them to do most of what you want them to do. You probably don't need to switch platforms. You probably don't need a new tool, because by the time you're ready for the new tool, you've already seen incremental improvement because you focused on how to make the process work better, how to enable your reps better. And then that technology is additive. Personally, I love sales technology. I started my career working at InsideSales.com. So I'm a huge advocate because I've seen what it can do. They believed in kind of the math of sales and like the money ball for sales, right? They talked about that all the time. If you make little tweaks along the way, if you just get the numbers to line up correctly, those small tweaks create an outsized impact on your revenue figures. So I'm a huge advocate for sales technology, because now it sounds like maybe I'm anti-tech here. No, but the reality is have you ever heard the first rule of technology, it's the first rule of technology applied to business by Bill Gates.
I don't think I have heard of it yet. Tell me about it.
This is one you'll like. He says that the first rule of technology applied to business is that automation applied to an efficient operation magnifies the efficiency. So if we add sales tech to something that's already working well, it's only going to magnify what we're doing. We're going to be more effective. But the second rule is basically the inverse, that automation applied to an inefficient activity or process is only going to magnify the inefficiency. So we go and spend a lot of money, we raise VC funds, and we say, oh, let's go buy all the coolest tech. And then we realize we don't even know who our ideal customer is. We haven't really talked about how do we craft the message that's compelling to them. And then we've sent 10,000 emails yesterday across our dozen reps because we have the capability to do that with the technology.
Oh my gosh, you were singing, music to my ears right now, because I even have my own customers that, they have all these goals in mind that they want to put out this many numbers of emails. And then I say like, whoa, let's step back here. Like, where are you even finding these people from? Why do you have 1 million contacts? Because I've heard people tell me that too. Who are these people on this list? And, what kind of messaging? And you're right. I think it's funny, like the more you talk with people, the more they haven't thought of those bigger questions. And they're not even that big, but of how it's all going to fit together. And I think it's really easy to just take advice from someone who's done well, or that you respect and admire. Maybe it's a manager at a different company, and just try to copy that into your process too. Not saying it won't work, but you need to think of a lot of other things before putting that into place.
Yeah, this was the challenge with some of what I would see years ago from people who would write for like the HubSpot blog, for example. They'd write these incredible, the headlines were so juicy. It was like, the way that the one template I use to create $2 million in pipeline in 30 days, right? And that email template for them in that market at that time with their product and their competitor stack, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. But guess what? Hardly any of us are in that situation. We're not in that circumstance right now. So it's really thinking about how do we apply that to us? It's really hard to do. And, an operations mindset helps, because operations is very analytical. It's very impersonal. Like, hey, why this? Why does this fit here? Yes or no? It's almost math based. So it's not strictly numbers, but it's really, why does this go together? Because if we can't explain that, if we can't justify it, we probably have something broken here. We probably need to look at it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going back to your second point too, where you see like these big problems running into is like these sales leaders, are focused on maybe coaching, role playing, numbers that they have to report back just on deals alone, like to their bosses, that they have a lot of weight on their shoulders. And that's where I think, operations is super important to have on a team. But, if there's someone listening to that right now where they don't have a sales operations, sector of their business, what's something they should start considering when trying to add that in the beginning?
Yeah, there's one tip that I never see people do this, and it always shocks me that nobody has this, but it will immediately raise for you the issues that you have kind of known always were in your sales process or in your sales team, but it's just diagramming your sales process. Most people have written out, they've said, oh, here's what happens, and then here's our sales stages, but literally saying, okay, we pick a target. Okay, well, which target do we pick and why? And well, how many people do we lump into that list? Okay, we built a list. Where are we getting that data from? Is that good data? Do we like that data? Is there an issue? And then, okay, we've got the list. Now we import it into HubSpot. Well, are we importing all the fields or some of the fields, right? And just granularly thinking what happens every step along the way and why, and if not this, then what, right? And giving yourself kind of a decision branch and saying, okay, well, we assume that every meeting we set is going to hold. Is that true? No, we have like an 80% show rate. Okay, well, then we need to say, what happens if they don't show up? Oh my gosh, we have a broken process here. We don't know what happens if they don't show up to that meeting. Oh, hey, we got this stage in the deal process, and we don't know what happens when they say maybe, or when they tell us they're not willing to schedule that next call. What's our process? Do we have a sequence for that? What should we build there? And you'll see how quickly you can identify. And then you just prioritize those things and say, okay, well, what list we build is probably the most important thing because it affects everything else in this funnel. And then down here, what sequence we add them to when they say they're not interested any longer, probably not as critical. Let's put that at the bottom of our list of things to do. So there's a lot that someone can do on their own just by diagramming and saying literally visually and asking the question, why this now, and what happens if not this?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that because it's so simple and something that you could do today. And not saying that it's not going to take a little bit of time to do that because I've mapped out. Yeah. And even just like as a sales leader too, let's say you are really burdened with things. Something that my manager has done with me is just ask me like, hey, write out the process for what you do, when you, in your role as a salesperson, you don't have to explain the why, you don't have to, but that gives your sales rep some initiative where they're not just doing sales activity all day, but they're feeling like, like maybe that's a job of a manager, which I want to do one day. So it's helping align with their goals. Have them write out that process. They're very close to it every single day. You go back to it, review it, see if there's anything in there, and then write down the importance of the why and kind of get critical about, okay, where are things falling off here? What are some things that we need to do with it? So if you really are bogged down, I'm not saying push all this work on your sales reps, but it's a good person to start with the process or brainstorm with it on there too. So it could be a little bit easier in that aspect.
Yeah, this is an exercise you could hand to all of your sales reps and say, hey, in under 5 minutes, draw out the sales process for me. And then compare the diagrams and see how many differences you find and see how many things you find that you didn't think you would find. Like, you guys don't use Sales Navigator? I thought you used Sales Navigator build lists like that. Oh, you guys never call them? You're just sending, I didn't even realize, like, man, I haven't been looking at the analytics last month. Oh yeah, boss, because we found that our phone numbers were not getting picked up. And when we, tested calling our cell phones, we found out they were showing up as spam. Oh my gosh, like I didn't know that. How many times do you find those things by just asking the rep to do that simple exercise? Limit it to a few minutes and then you won't be putting the pressure on them to do your job. But yeah, you can definitely identify some quick wins for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even think of it that way because we're all sitting remotely for the most part. I'd say a lot of us are. And then getting that list from your sales rep, it's like, okay, now I have a picture of like what's working, what's not working. Yeah. Also, if your reps aren't using Sales Navigator anymore, that's a huge expense. But thinking about those things, like we said, going back to technology that, maybe those are some considerations of maybe we'll use this differently, or maybe we'll use it in a different step of our process there too. But oh my gosh, this has been so useful, Rex. Thanks, for going through that. And for anyone listening out there too, just taking that actionable tip away of mapping out your sales process and putting that into kind of a diagram there or a tree. With finishing up and kind of wrapping up this conversation, I know we started out talking about your book. Is there any book besides your own out there that you'd recommend, or is it your favorite sales book?
Yeah. So before we hit record, I was talking about how I rarely read all of a sales book. So having co-authored a book that's very short, I mean, we're in like 80 pages or something like that with some homework space in there. I don't read long stories about sales, but I do love a lot of the principles from a lot of these sales books. I mean, I've enjoyed the Challenger Sale, the Ultimate Sales Machine. I think if there's one thing that Chet Holmes imparted in his incredible wisdom about the sales process, it was just his buyer's pyramid and talking about how many people are in market today and just helping me to relieve the pressure off of me and all the sales reps I work with when I teach them. Hey, most people aren't in market, and that's okay. If you're doing outbound sales especially, that's totally fine. Guess what? A lot of them are going to say no. You're trying to get those folks who aren't even thinking about it to start thinking about it so that you can harvest those later, which is why we believe in the bucketing principle. Is there's people you've talked to who said not right now, who when you call them back are a lot more impactful than trying to reach out to net new strangers again, right? Because they've been thinking about it. Hey, now suddenly it's on their brain. Oh yeah, I told you to call me back. All right, why don't we have a demo on that? You're going to win a lot more frequently if you're harvesting those seeds. But Chet Holmes, I would say Ultimate Sales Machine was a big one. There's all kinds of great sales books out there. I can't get all the way through them, honestly. There's usually so many stories, and I think that they all have their place. But for me, it's about getting in and getting the juice from them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for those of you listening right now, that's exactly what Rex's book, is about. It's super straightforward. I read it in one sitting. And there's so many actionable things in there, like the bucketing we talked about earlier. So for those of you, check it out. I think I got it on Amazon Kindle, super easy to download there, but Outbound Sales, No Fluff. Rex, where can people learn more about you, more about your business, more about sales operations too?
Yeah, so please connect with me on LinkedIn. I know it's hard to spell my last name, so I bought connectwithrex.com. That'll go right to my LinkedIn profile, so you can find me there. And you can always, find me on our website, nofluffselling.com.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on here today, Rex.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Shake Sales. We'll catch you next time. Bye.